Taking you all the way back to 1996. Everyone was taking care of their Tamagotchis. Tickle Me Elbow was the #1 toy for Christmas. And everyone was doing the Macarena. 96 was also the year that Nintendo 64 came out later in the year. We were still really involved with Super Nintendo games, and there's a lot of great games that came out in 1996. There wasn't as many games though, only like less than 50 games came out for the Super Nintendo in 96, preparing for the launch of the Nintendo 64, but some amazing games came out that year. We're going to talk about a lot of them in this video. Quick favor, look at the subscribe button. Does it say to subscribe? I mean, if you've been watching these videos and I'm showing up on your homepage, that's YouTube yelling at your face to subscribe. I'm almost at 200,000 subscribers. I'm really close. Subscribing is free, and also you can support the channel by checking out the stuff I sell in my shop, like my homebrews, my oddly specific air fresheners like this one that smells like a high school cafeteria. It's kind of like fruit cocktail and fresh bread rolls and cheap cologne or something. I also wrote a book about breakfast cereal of the 80s and 90s. Again, all these things available in my shop. Check out a link in the description below. Starting off with Final Fight 3. Now, probably my favorite one. I mean, I'm most nostalgic for the first one, of course, but Final Fight 3 was fantastic. 4 characters you can choose from in this one. You do still have Hagar, and you have Guy. You have a couple of other ones, too. There was a dude that could, like, electroshock you. Like, one of his moves will shock. And there's another woman fighter too, always cool to have. And it could have 100 new characters. Final Fight, I'm playing as Hagar every time. If there's a wrestler in the game, I'm playing as the wrestler every time. Just how it is. It was more the same, didn't need to change it. Final Fight 3, but this time Hagar has a big old ponytail, so yeah, whatever. Mega Man X3 came out this time around. Mega Man X3. It's a whole lot more Mega Man X, which is fine by everyone. It has that new chip in it too, that very exclusive, elusive, fancy chip that makes it better. I don't know what they used it for versus the other 2 games. I think they all play great, but I won't decline. Pretty neat game. It had that saber in it too. Was it called the Z Saber? Was that what it was called? That was a neat little addition for a game like a Mega Man game. But great stages, great play control, great soundtrack. Can't go wrong with Mega Man X3. Prehistoric Man came out for the Super Nintendo from Titus Software. You're going to see a whole lot more Titus Software games that came out for the Super Nintendo in 1996. I think it was a European company that came out. Some of the games are actually pretty decent, but we'll start off with Prehistoric Man. When you first look at it, it reminds me maybe a little bit of like a Joe and Mac, but it plays fine, just a little platformer. You play as a caveman, you can bonk people and jump on their heads to jump higher, and you have a roar button, which was kind of fun. And the sound it makes when you roar is like digitized, so it's not like, you know, like a video game sound, like a crunchy sound, like a chiptune. It's just like a sampled something roaring. I don't know. Maybe you're into it. SOS, which in this game stands for Sink or Swim, also came out. It's like Krusty's Funhouse. You ever play Krusty's Funhouse, where you have to save these people who are just walking mindlessly back and forth. We have to like kind of point them in the right direction or use the items to get them through to the exits. You can move on to the next stage. And that's Sink or Swim, or SOS. Cutthroat Island came out. Again, this was during a time where we didn't have Pirates of the Caribbean yet, so not a whole lot of pirate type games in 1996. Cutthroat Island, it's alright. It was like a beat 'em up, and it had that dumb thing that Golden Axe does, and other beat 'em ups do too, where if there's 2 enemies on the screen, the computer says, okay, 1 enemy in front, 1 enemy in back. They don't just target you all in the same direction, which would be too easy. But anytime that there's more than 1 enemy on screen, the other one will always go behind you, which is just dumb. So you just have to plan for that anyway. But Cutthroat Island, it was another kind of beat 'em up game, only this beat 'em up, you have a sword. Not bad. You can also still punch the enemies, but then you also have a sword and you have a block. It was alright. It was worth a rental. Frantic Flea came out this year, 1996. Frantic Flea. A game I didn't quite know what I was doing, but it played a little bit like, not exactly like Flicky, but it has that same kind of Flicky idea where you have to like run around and collect all the fleas so you can move on through the exit. There's a whole lot of things to pick up, but you can also defeat the enemies by usually just doing your little cyclone attack and ramming into them, but you have to like run into them like 5 or 6 times until they finally explode. And they keep coming back too. So Frantic Flea, I mean, is this one of those games that came out for the Super Nintendo? The Brainies was a puzzle-ish game. They could have put this on the NES, and if it was on the NES, it would have been one of those like odd-colored cartridges from like, not Wisdom Tree, but like a Color Dreams or something like that. Well, you have these different characters, and you have to put them on their color of base, I suppose. When you move the characters, they will keep moving until they hit a wall, or until they hit an item or an object or a something. So you always have to keep that in mind and consider that when you're moving them around, because later on levels, you have to like, you know, move one person a certain place, but don't put them where you're supposed to go yet, because you need to make another person would crash into them to block them from going any further, to move them into the space they're supposed to be. It was a puzzle game. It was brainies. It was alright. Power Pigs of the Dark Age, a little bit like Aladdin for the Sega Genesis, if it wasn't as good and you had medieval pigs, is exactly what Power Pigs of the Dark Age. Was it a comic book? Was it a cartoon? I don't know if it was either of them. Maybe it was. But again, it's just another one of those games from Titus Software, another one from Titus. There's gonna be a few of them on this list. Interesting to see. One of the highlights in 96 is we got Super Mario RPG. And this was that notion where you're like, oh, hold on now. You're gonna have an RPG. You're gonna have a collaboration with Nintendo and Squaresoft, like the two best companies, especially for the Super Nintendo, especially for the time. You're gonna have an RPG with Mario in the universe, and you can actually play as Bowser in this one. I thought that, to me, that was one of the highlights, was the fact that Bowser was on your team to accomplish this quest. And it was a lot of people, maybe their first RPG experience, because maybe they were too afraid to get into RPGs or something, but they like Mario. A little bit on the easier side, but still a lot of fun. Like, it was a little bit on the easy side, you know what I mean? Around this time, you're not looking for a challenge, and maybe you are, and that's fine. But around this time, you're just like, you just want a fun experience. And if you can just kind of go through it and go through the motions and, you know, still do a few things along the way to help you strategize on how to make it easier for you without just grinding and dying all the time, perfect. And Mario RPG had all those elements, and even the added element, which I absolutely love, as someone who kind of gets bored with turn-based RPGs of like, I hit you, now I'll stand here for you to punch me in the face. Which wouldn't happen in real life. But at least with this one, it gives you the added element of if you hit your timing with the button, then then you'll do like extra damage or something like that too. Wonderful experience. Even I wasn't that into sports games, but even I played me some Ken Griffey Jr. Winning Run. It just looked different and it just hit different. This is a baseball game for the Super Nintendo with backing of Nintendo because it is Ken Griffey Jr., it's the Mariners, and Nintendo had a big old piece of the Mariners, and it was made by Rare. The company that gave you Donkey Kong Country and all that gave us a baseball game. And it just looked and felt better than a lot of other baseball games. And I'm okay with baseball games because I think they're pretty fun for the most part. And this one just felt cool and it just looked cool. And it was Ken Griffey Jr., can't go wrong. Especially 96 Ken Griffey Jr. Lufia 2, you talk about some role-playing experience. Not really on the difficult level, but holy moly, there's a whole lot of enemy battles in this game. And it's not even a random encounter because you can clearly see the enemies on screen as they're moving around when you're moving around too. But there was a whole lot of that going on with Lufia 2. To me, Lufia 2 looked like it could have been a Genesis game that was then ported to Super Nintendo. I think just the box of where it says like, you know, fight, run, whatever, I think it just reminds me way too much of Shining Force for me to eliminate that aspect of it. But Lufia 2 is fantastic. I mean, the Lufia games are great. There's like 5 or 6 of them in the first place. On the Super Nintendo, there's a couple of them. And then I want to say Lufia 2 was the prequel to Lufia 1. Is that right? And correct me in the comments. I know you do. You're great at proving me wrong, and I love you for it every single time. Don't be afraid to reach out and say, hey, you know, the Hadouken isn't in Mega Man X2, it's in Mega Man X1, for instance. Just as if that actually happened, which happened a bunch in the previous video. I'm pretty sure Lufia 2 was set before the time of Lufia 1, if that makes sense. I think Lufia 2 is great. There's a whole lot of battles going on that one. We had a game called Mohawk and Headphone Jack. That's right, Mohawk and Headphone Jack. If Sonic the Hedgehog was on the Super Nintendo, I have a feeling it would look or feel a little bit like this, because you move way too fast for a Super Nintendo game, to the point where you just end up running into enemies anyway. And there's a whole lot of trippy effects and special effects, and then even when you're running, sometimes the whole screen moves with like the Mode 7-ness going on. Could you imagine like Sonic the Hedgehog on the Super Nintendo, where like if you went through like the loop-de-loop, Sonic would stay still and the whole screen would rotate? They would have done that for Super Nintendo for sure. And it's a little bit like that with Mohawk and Headphone Jack. I don't think the game's that great, but it still looks pretty cool. It's worth at least emulating and checking it out. Just look at the special effects. It's kind of trippy for the time. Tetris Attack was a cool game too. They've since re-released this as other styles or puzzles, and then it's on other platforms and stuff like that too. Tetris Attack, fun enough and easy enough, and it's a great puzzle game. It's a match 3. That's all it is. You know, the tiles are falling, but they're falling upward. That makes sense? Like, the tiles are already there, and it says, but you have to then flop the tiles around, and then either match 3 down or across, and it just keeps rising and rising and rising until you hit your, whatever you're trying to, you know, whatever the goal is for that thing. I think it's a lot of fun. I still play it today. Kirby Superstar was amazing. I was a huge fan of the Kirby games, and then Kirby Superstar for the Super Nintendo, literally on the front of the box, was like, you know, like 7 games, 8 games in 1, whatever it said. think it's 8 games to 1 or something like that. Because it has a traditional Kirby game, and the whole game could have been this one Kirby game. But then it has all these other little side games, like the Gourmet Race, like the Megaton Punch, where you have to, like, you know, split the Earth in half or split the world in half and stuff like that too. And still, again, a great Kirby game, where you still have your copy abilities, you can get a buddy along the way too. It has all these things going on for it, and it was so cool to see, and it's still one of the best games on the Super Nintendo, in my opinion. Of all games, for some reason, Miss Pac-Man. And not like Super Miss Pac-Man, not like Miss Super Pac-Man, not like Miss Pac-Man Goes to Hollywood. Nothing. It was just arcadey Miss Pac-Man on the Super Nintendo. It was Miss Pac-Man. Power Rangers Zero Battle Racers. That's right, Power Rangers Zero Battle Racers. A little bit Mario Kart-ish, but this time it's a racing game. So instead of having the fighting games or the beat-em-ups like we've had for Power Rangers in the past, now we have Power Rangers Zero. You drive around a course, and you can use an item every once in a while if you'd like. It's Mario Kart-ish, not super great on the controls, but it's something, especially if you're a huge Power Rangers fan. Did you play Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3? This game features no less than a bazillion characters you can choose from. No, that's not probably that many. There's like over 20 characters you can choose from in Ultimate Mortal Kombat 3. A lot. And it's more Mortal Kombat. Donkey Kong Country 3, this one featuring Dixie now. Before we had, Donkey Kong 21, Donkey Kong, Diddy Kong, good to go. Donkey Kong Country 2, they have Diddy Kong with Dixie. And now Dixie gets her own game along with the other guy, and it's more Donkey Kong Country with the new character, Dixie Kong's Double Trouble. Now available on the Super Nintendo. If you like the Donkey Kong Country games, you won't love this one. We did have Marvel Superheroes War of the Gems. Marvel Superheroes War of the Gems came out in '96, and it was alright. It was another side-scrolling 2D beat-em-up. You get to choose which Marvel character you want to play as. Very Avengers-like, without calling it the Avengers, because you can play as Captain America, or Spider-Man, or Iron Man, or Hulk. I'm going off memory now. Because it's Spider-Man, Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, and then who was in that other upper corner? I want to say it was Hawkeye. It was Wolverine. How did I miss out on Wolverine? Okay, so that's why it's called Marvel and not Avengers. It's because Wolverine's in it. Hello. So on that note, it plays okay, and the other enemies are other Marvel characters. So you kind of play it to see who else is going to be there. It was a great rental. Maui Mallard in Cold Shadow. You play the role of Maui Mallard, and the game is called Cold Shadow, if that makes sense. You're Donald Duck. But again, Disney, and Looney Tunes to an extent too, Disney is almost like the characters are Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy, all these other characters, who are just themselves, and they're actors in these cartoons, in these movies. So Donald Duck plays the role of Maui Mallard in the role of Cold Shadow. And it's actually a very decent game. Games that are Disney games are usually pretty good, and the animation is through the roof. I love this game for the animation, and it plays okay too. It's fun and worth checking out, especially for the time. You ever play Casper for the Super Nintendo? This one was a little interesting. Casper, love the movie, and you play as Casper, but Christina Ricci's character is always kind of scared a little bit, so you have to use these items and transform into things to protect her along the way too, and it just looks okay. It looks kind of cool. Could have been a better game or better experience, I think, personally, but it's there. Incantation, another Titus Software game. Good lord, a lot of Titus Software games, and this one especially looks like that kind of European style a little bit, but pretty decent game. It's like a not really a run and gun, but it's a run and platformy, pick up items, but you still use your magic wand to cast spells on these on the things that you need to cast spells on. It's kind of a run and gun, but still cartoony, platformy, pick up all the items that are floating around and everything. It's alright. And like how earlier we had Miss Pac-Man, just like the arcade version of Miss Pac-Man, at the end of the year for 1996, we had Mr. Do. I mean, Mr. Do wasn't even on NES. It wasn't even on the Famicom. That's how older this game is. Mr. Do from Universal. I wish they would make a Universal collection to have all these great Mr. Do games. But Mr. Do, it was a favorite of mine in the arcade. I loved the arcade version. I prefer Mr. Do's Wild Ride, which we would have had a compilation that had, Mr. Do, Mr. Do's Castle, Mr. Do's Wild Ride, Mr. Do, Do Run, but Do Run Run? Was that the other one? Run Do Run, something like that? I think it was like the Do Run Run. Wild Ride was my favorite. I love that one. But this is just old school Mr. Do. And kind of nice. You can also play this as a 2-player as well. So that's kind of nice if you want to have a second player play this old. It came out in 90, what did it come out in? 80, 81, 82, somewhere in there. It was a maybe even 83. It was a classic arcade game, but still a lot of fun. A little dig duggy, but you can also shoot a bullet and do that kind of thing. I don't know. I still like Mr. Do, so the fact that it's on Super Nintendo, it's fine by me. And we're running out of years for Super Nintendo. Make sure you binge watch the other videos leading up to this year, and we have more videos coming out super soon. Again, I hope you're subscribed. Thank you for watching. We'll get some more videos out to you right quick.